Hello and welcome to the Art Class Curator podcast. I am Cindy Ingram, your host and the founder of Art Class Curator and the Curated Connections Library. We're here to talk about teaching art with purpose and inspiration, from the daily delights of creativity to the messy mishaps that come with being a teacher. Whether you're driving home from school or cleaning up your classroom for the 15th time today, take a second, take a deep breath, relax those shoulders, and let's get started. Hello, everybody. It's Cindy Ingram from Art Class Curator. And before we get into our episode, I want to invite you to the Curated Connections experience this summer. Join me and your fellow art teachers for our 2021 Summer Art Teacher Workshops. We have one virtual and one in person. You can learn exciting and engaging teaching strategies, spend quality time with art, spark your own personal art connections, and inspire your teaching. You'll get to spend quality time with your peers and regain the power and excitement of art education before heading into the new school year. You can go to artclasscurator.com/workshop2021 to learn more, and we'll see you there. Hello, everybody. This is Cindy Ingram from the Art Class Curator podcast, and I am back for another curated conversations. That's what we're going to call this type of episode. And I am here with Jennifer Easterling, who is another of the wonderful Art Class Curator staff. And Jennifer works with all of our education and curriculum, writing lessons for our membership, the Curated Connections Library, and also our curriculums. So I am so excited to welcome you back to the podcast. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we had our first of these types of podcast episodes last month with Madeline Gregory, where we talked about Death and Life by Gustav Klimt. So if you haven't listened to that episode, I encourage you to go back. We did a two-parter for that, where we talked about a work of art. And so the impetus for this type of conversation is we pick a work of art, one that was meaningful to the person that I am interviewing, and then we just talk about it. So we don't really have an outline going in. We've had a little bit of conversation about what we might want to talk about, but we really haven't outlined this. The structure that we're using for this conversation is called Spark, which, if you have been following Art Class Curator for a while, you know we had the Spark hybrid learning curriculum, but we have a art criticism model called Spark, and you can get a download for that at artclasscurator.com/spark. But basically, it is see, perceive, ask and answer, reflect, and know. So we're going through each step in a kind of loose way. We never really follow it fully, finish one step before moving to the other. But we're really going to talk about what moves us about the artwork, what we know, what we think, what it teaches us about ourselves and about life. And then we'll also talk about how to teach this one in the classroom, because the artwork that Jennifer has chosen today is in the membership, and she has also used it in her classroom. So, Jennifer, can you share with us which artwork that you chose for this conversation?
Yes, definitely. So I chose Shirin Neshat, Rebellious Silence. And this artwork has just stuck with me ever since I came across it when I was looking at the art history AP 250 for the AP class. They have to know 250 artworks to take that AP test. And this one just really stuck with me. And I was so excited to find out that this one, along with a whole bunch of others, were coming to Fort Worth, so I could actually see it in person and live. And after researching and studying, and then to get to go see it, it inspired me and kind of made me think about art in whole new ways. So it's rather thought-provoking.
Yes. So for those of you who are listening, obviously you're listening because it's a podcast, but if you want to look at the artwork, we will put the artwork in the show notes. So if you head over to artclasscurator.com/65, you will find the image there to look at. But let's describe the image for those of you driving. Please don't go look at it while you're driving. Wait until you're not driving. But can you describe the artwork for the listeners?
So in this artwork, you have a woman who is wrapped in dark cloth, and it's got a very light background, and you see her stunning eyes. They're just very piercing, staring right back at you. Really, they really looked into my soul whenever I started looking at this artwork. And the more you look at it, the more you start to see. And she actually has writing across her face. And if you look closer, it's Farsi. And so I unfortunately cannot read Farsi, so I had to go look for some translations. And it's actually a poem written by a female poetry writer. And the words translate to, "Oh, you martyr, hold my hands with your hands, cut from earthly means. Hold my hands, I am your poet. With an inflicted body, I come to you, come to be with you, and on the promised day we shall rise again." And so the more you look at it, the more you start to see. And she's actually holding a rifle of a gun, and she's holding it straight up, but it's splitting her face vertically. And so you've got the shadows contrasting from the light to the dark, and you have all of these different imagery of all these things being blended together into this one image. And so the more you look, the more you see, and that's what I just found absolutely fascinating about it.
Yeah, I agree. Especially the eyes in this one too. I cannot stop looking at her eyes. They're so big and haunting and just, well, I noticed that too we both got to see this exhibit of Shirin shots at the Fort Worth Modern Art Museum. And I noticed that, is this her?
Yes. She was the model for her photographs.
Yeah. So she's in most of, a lot of her early photographs and in some of her videos as well. And yeah, her eyes are just a very prominent feature. So do you remember so you kind of talked about when you first discovered it and what your first reaction was to it. When you got to see it at the museum last week, what was your reaction when you sort of entered that space?
There was a lot of overwhelming feeling. Just, wow, this is it. I always kind of get those feelings of whenever I've written about something and looked at it on a computer screen or in a book for so long, and then I finally get to go see it in person. Like it changes, because it's the experience with the museum, just being in a different space, but then all of the other artworks around it, and you can see how they play off of each other. And so I knew that this one artwork, this one photograph, was a part of an entire series. I didn't realize how extensive that series was, and how one series led into another. And I couldn't believe how it took up the entire, 3/4 of the top level of the Fort Worth Modern. I just kept going and going, and there were more photographs. And
I love that about seeing a work for the first time that you know so well from the computer or from books. It's always like seeing an old friend, but also someone you've never met them before at the same time. Or I guess it's just like, we met first, you and I, on the computer. We didn't meet, until, I don't know, 2 years after. No, wait, we
met at TIEA after, because I attended one of your workshops, and I came up and met you afterward.
I don't remember that.
About that the other day.
Okay. Well, that you weren't Jennifer Easterling then to me. You weren't like the person who worked for Art Class Curator. You were just somebody else. Oh, right? Or had you already started working?
No, I hadn't.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad that
I was a member, and then I came up to you afterwards, and I was like, "Oh, I'm a member. I love you. Here's my number. You should call me sometime."
That's hilarious. I do not remember that at all, but I also get very overwhelmed at events like that. So
yeah,
I'm not surprised that I don't remember, but oh, that's funny. So anyway, so I can't use that example, but someone else you meet in a group online or something, you meet them in person. It's like, you feel like you really know them, but it also, like, you're seeing their body language, and you're seeing how they walk, and you're seeing, their expressions in a new way. And it's just gives you more information about that person. So it kind of feels that way with a work of art. It's really fun.
Definitely.
Okay.
It just changes. It changes the whole perspective of the artwork, and
the size.
Something about the space. Yeah, the size is definitely one that blows me away every time. Like, they're never the size that I have them in my head.
Yeah. And I think what surprised me about this one, and just the first few rooms of the exhibit, was I think I never looked close enough to see that the writing wasn't written on the person and then photographed. It was added to the photograph after. Mm-hmm. And that was really surprising to me. And it added a different layer of texture to it that I wasn't really expecting. But now that I'm looking at it on the screen, I'm like, oh yeah, it's definitely written on top. But for some reason, I didn't make that connection until I was there in person.
Well, and there's a really cool photo that I came across whenever I was doing the research, and it's of her writing, like actually doing the writing and the drawings on the photographs after they're printed. But what struck me is how huge they are. I'm thinking just, an 8x10 photograph, but they're not. They're huge. And to see that perspective of her drawing on them, because it you can see she's painting, and it's much more than just writing on there. There's more artistic thought to it. And this one, it's pretty straightforward across. And of course, she doesn't write across the eyes. She leaves that blank so they really stand out. But in some of her other works, the size changes according to the shadows and where they are on the body. And some of them she writes really large, and other ones she writes really small. Other ones she layers the writing and the text to create shadows and form on top of the photographs. And so there's definitely a lot more to it than just writing something on there, which is I thought was really fascinating.
I loved, there was a room with photographs of people from Egypt, and it had the writing over their faces. So I think the exhibit was chronological. So this stuff was kind of her early work at the beginning. And so this one we're talking about, Rebellious Silence, is one of her earlier works. The Egypt ones were later on, and they had, like you said, the writing was much smaller and it was layered. There was kind of dark writing and light writing, but some of the people were crying. Mm-hmm. Did you notice that? And she wrote around the tears and left the tears.
So that tear just popped out when she saw it. So it's the same thing she does a lot with the eyes. She'll write around the eyes so that those eyes, whoever it is, whether it's her or somebody else, they just really jump out and they would capture me. And I found myself just being drawn in to that person and their story. And, it made me wonder who they were. And I was reading a little bit of trying to read as many tags as I could, but a lot of them didn't have much beyond their name, like the person's name. And so it talked about that she photographed them because of their story, but it didn't really go into what the stories were. So then in my mind, I'm starting to, create all this narrative of who this person was and what they went through and why were they crying or what would spark those tears. And, and then it was connecting back to me, everybody has a story to tell, and are we spending time diving into that story? Or are we so absorbed in our own world we don't, think about other people's stories? So my mind was just flying. I was so exhausted after the exhibit. I think I told you I spent 3 hours just in this one exhibit, and I never do that. I'm usually running through and, okay, I'm going to look real fast and then move out. And I'm like, nope, I'm just going to take my time and go from each piece as I feel like it. And I spent 3 hours, but was just totally exhausted. I was like, then it dawned on me, it was so much emotion that I was seeing and feeling through all this. And I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I have to do this more.
I know. I felt the same way. My first reaction to it, since we're kind of talking about your first reactions, my first reaction was one, getting over the initial surprise of it's different than what I imagined. But the thing that I felt most shocking was realizing that I don't know this language. I mean, that's obvious, but, and they weren't always, sometimes the text was translated, but most of the time it wasn't. And I couldn't help but wonder what this experience would have been like if this were my own culture and this were a language that I knew, and how drastically different the experience would have been for me. And so it was this battle back and forth between feeling like I want to be let in. I want to understand. I want to learn, and I want to learn about these people and who they are, but also realizing that I never can. I never fully can. And that's true for any. You never fully, even my own children, I'm like, I never fully can understand what's going on in their heads.
Well, and while I was there, I came across this group of ladies, and they a little bit older in age, and there was 4 of them, and they were looking at the artwork, and I always kind of listen, I'm curious as to what they're talking about, but it just, there weren't very many people in there. And I heard this one lady start talking about how they were in Iran whenever the revolution happened, and her son was there. And so they had a whole different perspective on this and looking at these artworks because she was there. She experienced some of the things. So even though she, and I'm not trying to assume anything, but I don't think she was Iranian. She looked to be American. But she had this whole different experience from being in that place at that time. So she has this different shared experience than you or I have because we weren't there. And so I thought I really wanted to go up and like ask her more about it, but try not to have her too much. But
Yeah,
I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Well, and some other things that I noticed looking at the photographs up close and in person was all the texture in the cloth and the texture and the contrast in the backgrounds of each photograph, where it's just lost whenever it's on the screen, because it's not near as big, but whenever it's printed and large and such high quality, you really get to see all the nuances of the photograph and how well planned they were. These weren't just a quick snapshot and move on. Like you can see, just the texture and the way that she would pull the cloth and you see the cloth move. And I mean, I was blown away by that, because I do have a little bit of knowledge of photography and all that. And so looking at how each little piece was planned, I thought was really, really fascinating.
Yeah. Speaking of the cloth, so she's wearing a hijab and it's completely fully covering her face. And then it's just sort of draped. You don't really see her body underneath it. You kind of can see a little bit of a shoulder, but that's a really interesting use of positive and negative space because, the background's just white, but you start to think about it's just, artistically, it's just a black space. But there's so much in that black space, so much that the hijab symbolically represents. There's so much about, wondering who is underneath that and like who they are and what are their hopes and dreams and who is this woman and her history and her future and her feelings. And all of that feels like it's wrapped up in that just solid black cloth.
Yeah, and she kind of talks about that in some of the other ones. She, like most of them, you have the black cloth in it, against this really light background. So you've got that strong contrast. But in one of them, or two of them, I think it's actually white cloth. And it talks about the symbolism of white representing death. And she's using the cloth in the photograph almost as a shield. And there's one that's really powerful of her and her son together. And he's sitting in her lap and there's still a rifle, gun next to him, but she's got this cloth and it's just wrapped around and you just see their faces. And it's talking about using that as a shield against death, a shield against everything else that's going on. And so I thought that was really fascinating, that it had more meaning than just, contrast or, something tied to a culture. It was that protectiveness. And as a mom, I really started to connect with her on that too, wanting to shield her child from the outside world or anything else that might be going on. And so that one struck me too. I thought
there were many that really made me think about motherhood in different ways. There was one in particular that she was fully covered. And I don't think it was a burqa. Like I think I could see her face. Now I don't remember. I probably have a photo of it. Actually, I'm going to go look to be sure. But she was fully covered. And then her son, I think it was her son, was nude.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. And he was probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 or maybe younger, maybe 5. And he was fully like decorated in little like Persian patterns and, like that sort of, I'm scrolling back to look for it and trying to talk at the same time. And that's just recipe for disaster. One second, I'll find it.
Okay, it says, start photograph. She is completely covered except for exposed arm extended to her son, who is covered with the markings of his heritage. Decorative designs that can be considered Persian, Iranian, Middle Eastern, and Islamic. Compared with his mother, who is hidden, the boy seems to have full rights to his heritage, able to express them on his body without prohibition, even at a very early age. The suggestion here is that a male, by the mere virtue of his sex, is born with rights to expressions denied to females. Even though the woman is the boy's guide and mother, it is clear that she occupies a different social stratum when she is within the Islamic Republic.
Yeah. Just
blows you away, huh?
It does. And, and it's so funny. Like, I didn't really even need that label to fully get this one. It was so powerful and impactful to see that difference. And so I went back and looked at the photo just to make sure. And you don't see her face at all. You don't even see her eyes.
No, you don't.
She's completely covered. head to toe with just her arm coming out.
This was another one that I thought was really interesting with the texture layered behind, because it looks, you've got the dark black cloth that just is solid, but then you've got a white background, but if you look closely, it's lace. And so there's all this texture behind it, but it doesn't look like it has the same cultural patterns that it does on her son. So I know in some of it, she talks about like blending of cultures, because she was based in New York for a while. I think for the majority of time. I think she's still there, living and working.
Yeah, and there was another one that was kind of motherhoody that I really connected with. So that one we just talked about, just if you're curious, is called Untitled 1996. And any artwork that we mention that from the exhibit, we will include the titles and links to images in the show notes. So don't worry about that. I took a lot of pictures at the exhibit, and I'm sure Jen did too. The other one that I thought that I really liked was called Bonding 1995. And it had her hands. This time her hands were the ones with the patterns and decorations on them. And they were sort of cupped in almost like a heart shape. And her son's hands were, I think it was her son, in her hands. And his hands this time didn't have the decoration. And I went a lot of places with that one. We're not even talking about Rebellious Silence anymore, but we'll go back to it. We'll be in and out
together, and it's all part of this series of this whole Women of Allah. And so you see how interconnected they are, and that's what made this Rebellious Silence more impactful to me whenever I was seeing them all together instead of just on its own. Like it's powerful on its own, but then you see all of them, and it just hits you in different ways of like, wow, these, here's a woman really using her voice to speak out about all kinds of things without physically being there speaking. I thought that was...
Yeah. And what was really interesting to me as I was kind of watching my own reactions at the same time as experiencing the artwork. And one of the reactions that I had is I found myself, because women's rights are such a really important issue for me, it's something that I feel really passionate about. I found myself viewing a lot of these through stories that I know of how women's rights are non-existent in certain parts of the world, or, the fact that they have to cover up and all this stuff. So I was coming in with this attitude of, this is all negative, kind of, like the women's roles are all negative. And then I would read the label, and like, it would say, it would be talking about love, and it would be talking about connection to their faith. And it would, none of, like, the women's rights stuff was there and it was talked about, but there was also this love for their culture and love for their religion and love for their traditions. And, and I saw that, and it really reminded me that in this world, things are not black and white, even though we're looking at artworks that are black and white. Nothing is. And just the layers of all of those things together are so seen in these artworks. And it really opened my eyes to this whole topic of, what is the topic? I don't know. Like, what would I call that topic? Suddenly I'm like, I have no idea.
Of gender, of race, of culture,
Muslim women,
power of voice in curriculum.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, it opened my eyes to the issue of Muslim women's rights, that it's not so easy. It's not so clear what's right and what's wrong,
Right. Yeah. And I know in some of the labels, it talks about the contrast, which I thought was, had so many different meanings, because you're looking at the black and white contrast of just the photograph and those stark value changes. But then she was also talking about the contrast of the imagery, where you have a woman who is supposed to be, the homemaker and lovely and soft. And all, you have these all stereotypical things that a woman is supposed to fit into, but yet here she is holding a gun. And that's, that contrast. And then you have the hard steel versus the softness of the cloth. You've got that contrast. And, are you supposed to be seeing these things all together? So just lots and lots of contrast and clashes between many things, multi-layered, multifaceted all throughout this. So, it just, again, the more you look, the more you see, and the more you connect with it as a woman, and, connecting back to your own thoughts and culture and experiences, and what are things that are contrasting and clashing in my life and my experiences, and you can relate to her on many different levels with many different things, and it may not be specifically a gun, but how many times are things happening simultaneously in different cultures that, not necessarily simultaneously, but you see gun issues there, which, they're always being faced here in the US, and there's always these conversations happening, so it's, whenever you look at artwork from different parts of the world, it's interesting to see that, conversations don't always change. They might look a little bit different, but so much of it's the same.
Yeah. So let's talk about the issue of the guns in the artwork a little bit more, and like what they could symbolize, and also how she uses them for meaning. Because there's this one that we're talking about, Rebellious Silence, has the rifle coming straight up from below. It's basically just the barrel of the gun, and it goes across her face. There's another one in the exhibit where the woman is pointing the gun at the viewer, which obviously we didn't choose that one for the membership to show kids, because that's a little taking it probably a little too far. I think you'd get some parent complaints on that one. But so what are you thinking about the symbolism of the gun and why she included the gun in the artwork?
Well, I had many thoughts before, as just are these, and again, this is my American lens on things. And again, we're in Texas, so then there's a whole different other lens of being in Texas with that. But, in America, it's this whole idea of the right to keep and bear arms. So is this one way of her hanging on to her rights, or is it a whole other thing of standing up and, against something, or are you trying to fight for something? And if you look at the title, the Rebellious Silence. So are you rebelling against silence? Are you is this how you're rebelling, by holding that and carrying that? Or is your voice not working, so now you have to resort to other things? So in my head, I start to see all these different narratives. But then whenever I went to the show and read the different titles, it was talking about that this became a way, they were picking up arms to fight with brothers, for their country and their culture. So it was more back to that contrast of, maybe not supposed to, but here they are, trying to stand up and fight together to keep their culture and not lose that. So I thought that was really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I think my interpretation of the gun actually changed from when I saw it before to when I saw it in person. Mainly because of that issue I already talked about, how I went in with women's rights plastered on my forehead. I was like, this is what this is about. And then I got there and I was like, no, this is not what this is about. It's partially what this is about. But yeah, once I was there and in the space, I realized that these were women that were fighting for their culture. They were, and it was a protection of their culture. It was more of, it was that than fighting against. But I also think it can be both. And that, there's this thing going around, I hear it all the time now these days from coaches and people on the internet, called both and. Have you heard that?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So it's basically, a lot of people go into the world thinking about either or black or white. And I don't know who coined both and, but it's embracing the both and is seeing that you can be exhausted and you can also be energized at the same time. You can be both. You're not one or another. And I think that in this exhibit, the whole way through, I was seeing that play out, that it's you can be oppressed, but also you can fight for your cause. You can do both, and you can be both.
And you can be a mother and you can be a homemaker, but you can still stand up and fight for, whatever. So it's, I definitely see that. And the world is not always black and white. You think about how many grays there are in the world itself. There's not always a right and a wrong answer, because everybody has their own opinion and their own different take and, experience and, and all that has to play in. So.
Yeah, I get caught in that black or white thinking all the time, and I constantly have to remind myself. And I just felt like this whole exhibit was like, Cindy, look at this. So another example of why you need to stop doing that. So that was kind of an important lesson that I got.
Well, and I pulled the card up and it says, the woman in the photo is vigilant and ready for whatever threat is coming her way. So, that could be anything. And that could be taken in so many different ways. And you apply that to your own life. It's just, this is readiness for whatever might be coming. Is it the hardness of the day, just getting the kids ready for school and getting to work and running through your day? Are you ready for that? Or is there something else that, you have to really fight for? Your culture, your freedom, your experiences, your family, whatever. So this idea of being ready.
Yeah. So she's like armored up. She's got her weapon. And that made me think about, well, that's what the gun means to her. But then there's the element of now the gun is separating her from the viewer.
Right.
It's this barrier between the two people. And so that's impacting our relationship with her.
Yeah, for
too.
sure. Yeah. And then you see the light against the dark. It's how does that play in? Is it right? Is it wrong? That plays in.
Mm-hmm.
So,
wow.
And then her eyes just keep drawing me back in, and I start thinking, okay, what's her story and what has she been through? And, why would she be holding this gun? And what is she trying to fight for or separate us from or all that, those, and the cliche of the eyes are the window to the soul. But so many of her artworks concentrate on that. And the eyes are what make us unique,
Yeah.
Everybody has their own eyes, but, physically, yes, they're different, and they are unique and part of our individual makeup, but it's also how we see and perceive things too. Everybody has their own take on how they're seeing things. So there's so many layers that you could dive into this.
Yeah. Yeah. And Madeline and I in our last conversation talked a lot about eyes because that was a big thing in the artwork that we looked at. But I think you can never get enough like really dramatic eyes in an artwork because they're just drawing me in. Like if I just sit there and let myself stare into her eyes, I feel like I would just like completely lose myself. I'm trying it and I'm going to not be able to talk because they're so good. She just has beautiful eyes.
I think it connects us back to her. So the more I look at her, the more I feel connected with her as a person, as an artist, as a model, as a activist, as, whatever else.
Yeah. And there's something about just looking into somebody's eyes that's just, it's incredibly vulnerable of a thing. Like you feel, it starts to feel kind of like as I'm looking at, as I'm staring at her eyes on my computer screen, I'm not looking at you, but it's like I just feel really vulnerable about it.
Mm-hmm. Like she's in my soul. Yeah,
she is seeing something in me that maybe I don't know. And I'm seeing something in her that maybe like she doesn't know, like the secrets that we sort of keep and hide away. Like,
but
I feel like it's
feeling
there.
Connected too, like she's seeing into my soul and I'm seeing into her soul. But that idea of like really connecting with somebody, and you talk about, in culture, eye contact can be really important. That, helps you understand somebody and shows you that you're paying attention or, whatever else. But yeah, whenever you get this photograph and she's just staring into my soul, like, what do you want to know? I can tell you everything, or maybe you already know it.
Yeah. And that's what these sort of activities, where you think about your own life in reflection, in response to an artwork, I think are so powerful because it isn't just about her. It's about us too, looking at her, like, especially when she's looking straight at us, the artwork then becomes about us. And like, what is our role in this artwork?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
What do you think she wanted us? What do you think Shirin Neshat wanted from us looking at this?
Question. It's a really good question. Well, I mean, the more I look at it, again, I just feel this connection to her, and I feel curious about her and her culture and what she's going through or has been through. And, I become more curious about the writing and what it means to her, what it means to somebody who can read Farsi. But then you read the translation, if you have that, and you start to see, like, you're able to kind of understand maybe a little bit more. But I think a lot of it is just, this is one powerful way that she was able to use her voice and really reach a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and especially now it's being included in the AP 250. Kids all over are seeing this and being able to connect with her and her voice and the message that she wants to get out there. I think part of it, like fighting for your culture, your freedom, whatever it is, fight for whatever threat may be coming your way, whatever that might look like. But empowering people, empowering women, that don't be afraid of whatever it is that's coming your way. Yeah, but for it to make it into high schools, I think that's pretty powerful. That it's her voice is pretty strong. Like, that's amazing. So
yeah, I think that too. Part of me, I kind of thought about that question I asked of you for myself too, and I'm thinking that one of the things that she wants from us is, and again, this is conjecture. She didn't tell me this, but that's what art interpretation is that I think she is wanting to educate us, as two white women who go in with a certain stereotypes of what we think that life is like for Muslim women in Iran. She's challenging us, I think, to question our stereotypes, and she's challenging us to I don't think she's educating us, but she's challenging us to educate ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. And I know I've done a lot more research on things now since I've looked at it, because it created all this curiosity in me. And, I had all these questions and narratives. And so that sent me to go research and find out more about history and culture and all that. And, what might have spurred these images.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I hear that a lot too from just like in relationship to Black Lives Matter and things like that. I've heard certain Black people say, stop asking us to educate you. Like it's this feeling. It's like, it's not our job to educate you. It's your job to educate yourself. And so I feel that connection with this as well. Okay. So let's talk about the poem.
Yeah.
And the text. Do you want to read us the translation again? Because I'm sure people have forgotten by now.
Yes. So she only used female poets in all of it. So every photograph she did in the Women of Allah series, it has a poem to go with it. The poem is by Tahirih Safarzadeh, and forgive me if I mispronounce that, but it's called Allegiance with Wakefulness. And the poem is, "Oh, you martyr, hold my hands with your hands. Cut from earthly means, hold my hands, I am your poet. With an inflicted body, I've come to be with you, and on the promised day, we shall rise again."
Okay, so what's your interpretation? We've never really done poetry interpretation before together. This is fun.
Yes. So whenever I'm reading it, I start seeing a bunch of the other artworks and not so much this one in particular. But this whole idea of a martyr is really interesting. And, is she the martyr in the artwork? Or is this talking about a different martyr and she's going to fight for their cause, or why they were the martyr? And then all the imagery with hold my hand with your hands. I think of the other artworks where there are hands in them. She's holding the hands of her child, or the hands are holding the gun or near the gun, or, there's another one where her hand is just barely touching her lips. So like those images are coming to mind whenever I'm hearing about all of this, or reading about the hands and holding my hands. But this idea of we will rise again, or we'll live to fight another day, or, we'll rise from the ashes. All those images are coming to mind whenever I read that. I don't know.
What I think is happening in the poem is I think that it is from the perspective of Allah, of God. And God is the one speaking those words. So he's saying, he/she, she is saying, I don't like to say he because we don't know. He's saying, you're the martyr. I'm with you. Hold my hands. And it says, with your hands cut from earthly means. So that made me think like the your is the person on land.
Sure.
And it says, I am your poet. And then, you have this body, you're of this earth, but I'm here with you. and I'm protecting you, and then I've got your back, basically.
And then we shall rise again. That, like in Christianity, where it always talks about, the saints will rise again and come back after when Jesus comes back again. But I don't know. So you may have to edit all that out. But that's stuff like that was coming to mind.
But I think you're onto something there. And I think that, well, it's true that, Muslim or Islam comes from Christianity. It is an extension of Christianity. It's just the Prophet Muhammad. So they believed in the things leading up to, and then Prophet Muhammad was like the next prophet. So they're still the same. It's the same God, like the same God as Judaism, the same God as Christianity.
Yeah. And then
I believe. And
again, not knowing Islam, but this idea of, are the saints going to rise again? Do they have saints in Islam?
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Questions to be answered. And that's things that I think it's important to note, like we are not Muslim, and we're talking about an artwork that is very much connected with its religion. And so we have to be really careful, but also I don't think we need to be afraid to make those connections to things that we know. And then we can find meaning, and we can work it out, and we can figure it out. And that way it's a little scary because you don't want to like offend anybody. You don't want to get something wrong, but also you're not going to learn until you've done that. I think
it's important to have conversations around things you don't know. Because again, that's how you learn, or it generates new questions that drives you to go find the answers just out of curiosity. So I think it's good to be able to have conversations around things you don't know and don't understand.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to teach our kids. And it's also, there's a lot of people in this world who are quick to shut you down if you don't, quick to correct you or to comment that you're getting it wrong, or that you're but if you're coming from a place of, I want to learn and I want to do better, I'm going to do my best to do that, you can't do anything more than that.
Right.
If you're coming in and saying, this is what I know and this is what's right. And, if you're coming with that attitude, yeah, correct me, call me out on that. But if I'm trying to learn and I'm working through it, I think that's really important.
Well, and this is where I think like the beauty of looking at art from other cultures, so much of it, like we can connect to it ourselves in different ways, and drives us to learn more about the culture and different beliefs and different, just ways of being. And that's why I love looking at art from all around the world, because it helps me know more about them or about that. And, it helps expand my knowledge so I can better connect with people.
For sure. So yeah, I think the writing is really meaningful when I look at especially the lines of the cut from earthly means and the with an inflicted body, because our bodies like take such a beating in our life, but they're like with us, and they're taking care of us, and they're protecting us. And most of us are like incredibly mean to our bodies. We're like, we don't give it enough sleep, or we don't, eat the right foods or whatever. I don't want to shame anything, but like, our bodies through all of that, through the abuse that we go through on a day-to-day basis, like self-inflicted or other people, whatever, that like our bodies are here for us and keeping us alive every single day, every single moment of our lives. Like your body's got your back. So I feel like too, this poem also could be like, you could go a whole different way and be like, this poem is like your body's message to you. Like, and I just now thought about that, but it's like, I'm here with you. I'm protecting you. You're safe if you're with me, like, I feel like it's kind of could be a little love letter.
Yeah. I've come to be with you.
Yeah.
You are with your body. You only get one, and it's with you all your life.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Fascinating.
Indeed. And that's my own personal journey coming through, my own personal connections, because that is something that I do spend a lot of time like thinking about and processing, like how my body is here to protect. You're here to like make me live the best life.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to the writing on it, it's so beautiful. And that's what I've always like admired about Farsi and different languages. I love to see how they're written because it's really, really beautiful. It's very artistic. And, the way she has added all the writing itself, despite being in another language, like that is an art form in and of itself. And it's just incredible. And so I get lost in this different language.
Yes. And I think if it were English written on there, it would be far less beautiful. Like it just would not. I mean, I guess you could write it in a certain way to where it'd be beautiful, but it's also too, it would, writing in English would then take the mystery away from me. Like I think even though I wish I knew what it, like I wish I could read it, I also like the mystery of it too at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also it connects back to traditional forms in Islamic art. You know, the written word and calligraphy is probably the number one art form of Islamic art. And so I think that's a really important tie-in for her to include that in her own work, that cultural connection.
For sure. So again, many different layers of this. You know, you could examine each facet and talk forever on each little thing.
And even in her other works, it's not just the writing, but the other art forms that are prevalent in Islamic art are like the nature motifs and the patterns and the swirly lines and all of those sorts of patterns. We see that throughout her artwork too. So as someone who has studied art history, I like to bring that in and make that connection in her art.
For sure. Well, in some of the other artworks, not in the Women of Allah series, but as she moved different locations, because the Women of Allah series, I think was taken in the US. I'm trying to remember, but there was another one where she went back to Iran and took pictures with her family. And with that, she placed a very traditional kind of, I think it was English background where you have like this garden and stuff. It's kind of soft, but it doesn't look like it's from Iran. And she talks about that, like it's very deliberate that it's of, I guess, more Western culture. And then she is in the foreground, and sometimes it's just her, sometimes with, I think, her sister or her niece. And then there's one with several family members. And so they are in more traditional dress from Iran. And it's that clashing of cultures, but also that blending of cultures where, she's been living in the US for such a long time. But yet she wants to hang on to her roots, and she still has a lot of family, in Iran. And so she blends all of that together in different ways. I think it was the English garden. That's what it was that is in the background. And then she does different things with vines and stuff. So I thought that was a whole different, interesting take, and how she's moving from place to place.
Yeah, that series with the garden in the background, I thought was so different than stuff before it. It was really fascinating to see. So I went back to check because you were wondering if she was in the U.S. When she did the Women of Allah series, and so I think she was. She moved to the United States in
75.
And she came back
in like 1990. And that was the first time she had been back since the Iranian Revolution. So she came to the U.S. to study with her sister in California. And whenever they were in the U.S., the revolution broke out and it cut her off from her family for 11 years. And so it wasn't until the 1990 that she was able to go back and actually see her family for the first time since everything had happened. And she talked about how so much of her home had changed. She didn't even recognize it, and it was just totally different. And, that sent me thinking about, I grew up in a really small town, but then I moved away. And so anytime I go back, like it's the same, but it's not, like my family's still there and I have all these memories and all that there, but it's never quite the same, whenever you go back to your home. And so I was looking at it from other eyes. So, and not that there's been a revolution in my hometown, but, things always change. Time passes and people come and go, and it's always changing.
Yeah. So there's a quote that I just want to call about just what she said about when she came back. And so she came back 1 year after Ayatollah Khomeini's death. And it says, it was probably one of the most shocking experiences that I've ever had. The difference between what I had remembered and what I was witnessing was enormous. The change was both frightening and exciting. I had never been in a country that was so ideologically based. Most noticeable, of course, was the change in people's physical appearance and public behavior. So is that when people started to be more, is that when like the women's rights thing started to get worse? Was in because of the revolution?
That was my understanding.
Yeah.
I thought this quote was interesting, and it's in the lesson, but it says, this was something that she had to say about her work. She says, it's really about the question of people versus tyranny and people who fight power versus people who hold power. That was found on npr.org. And so, whenever she's exploring her experiences of creating art while in exile, and she keeps coming back in all the interviews that I've watched her give, she keeps talking about this artist being an artist in exile and being exiled from her home. And this is how she is, I guess, kind of dealing with those experiences of being in exile and how she's facing, this time in her life. And so it's talking about exile and martyrdom and identity and Islam, women at the intersection of political tyranny and religious fanaticism, as well as the idea that good and evil exist in all of us. And so all of her stuff really has many, many layers, and you could look at it from all different lenses, all different viewpoints, and have, connect with it in some way, some fashion.
Yeah. Okay. So we are kind of we've been talking for a while. I think we're kind of getting to a point where the podcast should end eventually. We could probably keep going for another hour. I feel like we could, but let's kind of wrap up with some, because the problem too is I just thought of the whole topic of masculinity versus femininity. And I feel like that's in all of her work too.
It is. And she talks about it.
So shoot. Okay. No, what we need to talk about is the videos. I feel like we would be doing her work a huge disservice if we did not talk about the videos before we ended. So I was going to have you share your personal connections, but I'm going to wait because we need to talk about the videos first. And so she's a photographer, but she is a filmmaker, and she does both video art, but then she also makes films too. And the line between what is a film and what is a video art, I'm not exactly sure about, but I never in an art exhibit have I ever sat and watched every single minute of every single video installation. There were maybe 4 or 5.
Yeah, there were a lot more than I expected, but yeah.
And me and Madeline both, we sat and watched every single one. And at the end of it, I was like, that was really the star of the show. That was the most eye-opening, the most interesting. Like, I just really loved the videos.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had seen some just in my research for the lesson plan, and I thought they were really powerful, but seeing them in the museum setting, where especially there's one where on the computer screen, they're just side by side, and it's 2 different films like playing at the same time, but in the museum, they had it on 2 complete separate screens, 2 sides of the room, 2 walls. And so it totally changed the meaning of this video. And what you have to start off with, you have a man, and he gets up onto a stage and he sings, he gives this song performance in front of many other men. And whenever he's done, they're all clapping and giving him applause and praise for his song. Well, then on the opposite wall, a woman gets up and she gives a performance, but it's a total different feel. And the audience is empty. So she's just performing to empty chairs, and she's singing, but at the same time, it's different. It's more these guttural sounds it's more sounds, I guess, instead of actual lyrics. And it's beautiful and haunting and terrifying and amazing, like all at the same time. You really can't put it into words. But whenever she starts giving her performance, the men stop, and they stop and they turn, and they're just watching and looking at her almost in shock. And so whenever she ends, they just stop and stare, like they almost in disbelief, I guess. It's kind of hard to say. Like that was kind of my interpretation of it, is that all of a sudden they're kind of in this like, what are you doing up on stage, and what is that? And anyway, it was really fascinating to see, that play of the two videos, how they interacted with each other on opposite screens versus, just side by side on a computer screen. And of course they're huge. And so that makes a difference too. But
yeah, in that same room, they played another video that had, it was a men, women thing again, where there were men on one side and they were like digging a hole or something. Did you see that one?
Yeah, they're
in the same room. Yeah.
They're in this like medieval city, and they're all in white shirts, and the women are all in black. And so you see that contrast too. And they're going around the city and doing all these things together. And then as soon as the women speak up, like they stop and freeze, and they're looking at them like in confusion, almost like, why are you speaking up? And
it's like the men stop and are just staring at the other wall. So then you look at the other wall, and that's when the women are doing their thing. And then when the women would stop, then the men would continue doing it. It was just this back and forth that was so interesting. And then ultimately the women ended up going to a beach and getting on a boat and like sailing off into the distance. And then the men were at this, like you said, this sort of medieval fortress, and there were cannons. I was so worried the men were going to shoot cannons at the women, but they didn't.
I know, right?
I was like, no, don't do that. But then they were just like watching. Yeah, they were just watching in disbelief. Like, what are they doing? Where are they going? Why are they leaving? They're not supposed to leave. That's the vibe that I got.
And I read the card before I went in, and like, because I never do that at museums. I just like go up and look at the artwork. But this time I like purposefully read, and it was talking about how the men were almost like chained to the city where they couldn't leave. Like they were stuck there together, and where the women are like free, and the boat's there like freeing item that's like taking them beyond. So I thought, interesting. So I kind of was viewing it through that lens after reading the card first. So
yeah, I relied more on label text than I ever have in this exhibit. It just felt really important that I read every single label, because I wanted, and they had a lot of poems on the walls too.
Yes.
Those were really, really amazing. Such good poems. Yeah, so the videos were incredible, and like Jen said, those are online. So we'll see if we can find links to those two that we talked about, and we'll put those in the show notes so you can check them out. They were just so good. But the only one I didn't like is the one with Natalie Portman in it, because all I could think of was that's Natalie Portman.
Yeah,
she took me out of it.
Yeah,
and I was like, why is she here? What is she doing? And then my brain was just like, do they know each other? How did this happen? I was trying to figure out how Natalie Portman ended up in it instead of focusing on the actual artwork itself.
And none of I guess there's one that has dialogue in it, one video out of all of them, but the rest of them are mainly, they're not silent, but they've got music and sounds and stuff, but there's just not dialogue. And so you're putting a lot of your own thoughts, feelings, emotions into the videos themselves. And so I found myself like standing in the person's shoes as they're going through this video and experiencing these different things. And so, yeah, it's interesting whenever you take a video and then just take out all the dialogue. It totally changes your perception and your take on this.
Yeah, I think you really do. You have all that time too, because you might not spend a lot of time in front of a 2D work of art, although I do a lot. But like this one, you have more time, so you're thinking more, you're interpreting more, and then you're looking for where you fit. And the one I found that I fit most into was the one where the woman was becoming the tree.
Oh, yeah.
And she was hiding in the tree, and then there's like this group of people coming, and then she just slowly becomes the tree, and then she's not there anymore. And I felt really connected with that, because I think it's part of my anxiety that when I have anxiety, my instinct is to hide. Like I want to go like in my closet and I want to like hide on the floor, get myself in a ball. I want to close the door and turn the light up. Like I don't want to be seen. And so I felt like she was trying to hide in plain sight, and she managed to like turn herself into a tree. And I don't know. I could see
how, oh, if I had that power.
I know. Wouldn't that be so comforting?
I'm just going to be a tree today.
And that made me think just like meeting you at TAEA and me not remembering is probably because I really needed to like turn myself into a tree at that moment right after a session. So there we go.
It's all good. It's all good.
Indeed. Okay. So so you went to this exhibit, you saw this rebellious silence as well as her whole work of art. If you could think of one sort of key thing, personal connection that you're going to take forward, something that's going to about your own life that you learned from this, what do you think that would be?
Well, to definitely go in with open eyes and an open mind and an open concept and just let the art speak to me however it's going to, try to get rid of any past things that I had read or seen and just be with the art and be with the exhibit, be with the artist in that place in that time. And I thought that was really nice because, most of the time I've got people with me, but this time I was by myself and I could just go and exist and be with the art and let it speak to me in whatever way. And so that's whenever I found that I was able to open up a lot more and let all of this art speak to me in so many different ways where, if I'm in a rush or whatever else, that doesn't happen. So
yeah, I think you learned not to take your kids to every art museum you go to.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, and as I'm finished, I'm like, yeah, the family would not have enjoyed this. They would have been rushing out, especially if I'm in there for 3 hours by myself on this one floor. They would have been like, are you ready? Let's go. But being able to just, push all of the inhibitions back and just be like, okay, I'm just going to exist in this space, with this art and let it speak to me and learn from it. What is going to stick with me. And so, yeah, these have really stuck with me, and I can tell whenever I'm still thinking about them, like days later, I'm like, okay, that spoke to me in many different ways. So.
Yeah. I think my main sort of personal connection was the existence of the both and the black and white thinking that I'm always having. I live in this world in my head where my head's like, you can't be smart and be spiritual. Like you can't love science. And, I have this thing that I do. And it's just in every area of my life, I tend to do that. And the only person that is being harmed from that sort of thinking is me. Like I'm just making myself feel bad for no reason at all. So I think that was a great lesson in me. It's really important. And I think we talk about this a lot at Art Class Curator is finding the personal connections to works of art, finding what that artwork has for you personally. It's not about going in and learning everything that you can about the artist and learning about the way she used contrast and the way she used space. It's deeper than that. It's more than that. It's how can you use that art to better yourself, use that art to create joy, to create insight, to create meaning in your life. And I mean, you can't just enjoy a work of art too, but when you can find these lessons, I think that's where
personal connections,
it's
it's whatever that may be, whatever way, shape, or form, because it's not going to connect with everybody the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But
if I went back to that exhibit today, even though I just went I don't know, maybe a month ago, if I went back today, I would probably come out with a completely different lesson, because
for sure
every time is different, and so we just have to be open to seeing what that is and letting the art guide you to whatever you need to know or feel.
Well, and I think one other thing is the stories. Everybody has a story to tell. And are we willing to listen? Are we open enough to listen to those stories? And that in turn will then connect us to other people. So, I think part of what I've learned with this job is all the connections in life. And every day I'm going through and I'm seeing things interconnected and intertwined that I've never seen before. And, I'll spout off something that may seem really random, but in my head, I've connected it to all these things. And people look at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you don't see the connection between all these things. It's amazing. It's like revolution. But, I come back to the stories and, now I feel connected to these people and the stories that they're trying to tell or that Neshat was trying to tell with their experiences. So even though I don't know their full story, I feel connected to their story in some way, connected to these people and all the different things.
Okay, that was a beautiful way to end. However, we're not done because I do want to hear from you. You have taught this artwork in your classroom.
Yes.
And so I want to hear how that went. What did you do? And any insights you had from that?
So when I taught this in my classroom, we started off with this idea, what do you see, or what's going on here and what makes you say that? And so it's always beautiful to watch what the kids say, see, connect with, bring out. And there was a lot of really interesting conversations that we had. It's been a little bit since we had these conversations, so I don't remember specific things, but I remember having a lot of really deep conversations. And I was super passionate about this. And I think the kids felt it too, just learning more about it. I was excited to share it with the kids. And so we talked about the woman, and we talked about the writing, and we talked about, what is she trying to say? Where is she trying to go? So looking at all those kind of things. And then what we did with the artwork is we looked at a poem. It's the I am character poem. And it talks about like, I am blank, and you fill in the blank. So I am, and I see, and I feel, and I think, and you're putting in all of these different thoughts and feelings. So I had the kids print off pictures of themselves. So we took, selfies, printed them in black and white. And then I had the kids write their I am poem on their face, talking about I am whatever. And I left it really, really wide open for them. And I had kids who spoke different languages and wrote in different languages. And I encouraged them to write in whatever language they wanted to, that it didn't have to necessarily be legible. This is more for them of like, what are you? I am, you tell me. And one specific student, I remember he struggled with this a whole lot, and he just wrote this I am poem. It was kind of silly, whatever. It's like, that's fine. It doesn't have to be super serious. It can be deep and meaningful, or it can be light and fun. I'm leaving it up to you. And so he wrote this real, kind of blew off the assignment or whatever, and wrote some stuff down. And I was like, okay, that's fine. We'll go with it. But then all of a sudden he took it back, maybe it was a few days later, and he had scratched out the majority of it on his face and rewrote the poem. And it was this deep, deep, meaningful, insightful poem about who he was and, different things that he felt and was going through. And I was like, whoa, but it also, allowed me to connect with him in different ways. It gave me this insight into who he was as a person, as a student, as, all the different things. And, it really gave me insight to who he was. And I thought that was really interesting. I was able to share it with his mom, and that gave her insight too, so that we could better connect with him and help him in different ways so that he could be a successful student. So it was a fascinating assignment, because then we didn't try to copy her. We just took inspiration from her. And
I love that story because it shows in a really real way, really real, how students are capable of these sorts of really amazing art connections. You could see, like in that story, he was holding himself back at the beginning. He was keeping it surface level. He didn't want. It looked like maybe I'm projecting onto this kid, but he was like scared to get too vulnerable.
For sure. And then that's exactly what was going on. Like knowing this kid now and knowing more about him, that's exactly what was going on. But it wasn't until he pushed himself, and I didn't even do it. Like I gave it to him, and I stood back and I let him run with the fun thing. But he took it upon himself to go back and do it again and push all this other meaning. And so that I was so proud of him. But you're like, okay, that gives me chills. Like, yes, I connected with a student, and the student was able to connect with art.
Yeah, he gave me chills. You gave me chills talking about it. It's just amazing. So I think that's an amazing place to leave off. So if you're listening, I want to remind you can go to the show notes at artclasscurator.com/65 to get the links from this episode, look at the artworks. We have some pictures that we took at the exhibit that I'm sure we can throw in there as well. And then also the I Am Character Poem worksheet that Jen just referenced. We have that in the store on our website, artclasscurator.com/worksheets. We'll also put a link to that in the show notes. Also, if you're a member of the Curated Connections Library, we do have an entire lesson on Shirin Neshat's Rebellious Silence in there, which includes a lesson plan, discussion questions, engaging activities, links to like YouTube videos and TED Talks that Shirin Neshat has done. I think there's a TED Talk in there,
Yes.
or just videos and interviews and things, project ideas, worksheet templates, all the works for that work of art. So if you're inspired to talk about this with your students, we've got that in the membership. We'll also link that in the show notes too for our members. And this was a really awesome discussion. We were going in a little bit worried and nervous. We didn't know how I was going to go. And I don't know why I'm nervous, because when you've got art to talk about, you always will have something to say. So thank you so very much, Jenn, for joining me today.
So happy to do it.
All right. So that is all for today. We will see you again next week. And again, if you want to be on the podcast and you want to talk about a work of art and share something meaningful to you and have a conversation like this, we would love you to be on the podcast. So if you go to artclasscurator.com/podcasts, and at this podcast with an S, at the bottom, there's a form that says share your art story. Fill that out and tell us about it. And we would love to talk to you about it. All right. Thanks so much for listening. See you later. When you're a teacher, one thing is certain: the lesson planning never ends. The Curated Connections Library is here to help with hundreds of art connection lessons and activities. Our signature Sparkworks lessons include everything you need to teach an artwork every single week. Each lesson features one diverse and captivating work of art and is complete with discussion questions, engaging activities to create deeper art connections, and related art project ideas. With unique worksheets and PowerPoint presentations, every lesson is classroom ready. Get your free Sparkworks lesson and take a break from lesson planning by going to artclasscurator.com/free lesson. Thank you so much for listening to the Art Class Curator podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us an honest rating on iTunes to help other teachers find us and hear these amazing art conversations and art teacher insights. Be sure to tune in next week for more art inspiration and curated conversations.